At the beginning of the film, we see the main character named Eddie Mora, a failed writer who dreams of that very book capable of making him famous and rich. He spends all his time writing it, and for several weeks now, he's been experiencing writer's block and can't write even a couple of pages because all his thoughts hit an invisible wall beyond which there's nothing but emptiness. Later, he meets with his girlfriend, who says she wants to break up with him. She's tired of paying his bills and hopes for better. Eddie himself was sure everything was fine between them and that one day they would get married. But Lindy is adamant and believes everything is over between them. Devastated by this news, Eddie leaves the cafe and on the street runs into his ex-wife's brother named Vernon. He immediately notes that the guy looks homeless, and Eddie, trying to save face, assures him he has a contract and is completely immersed in work with no time for himself. Such an explanation doesn't convince his brother-in-law, and he suggests Eddie grab a drink. Vernon admits he hasn't been in touch with his sister for a long time because she moved out of state, and Eddie shares that during all this time he hasn't written a single line and is falling further and further behind schedule. Then Vernon, who works at a pharmaceutical company, offers help in the form of a special pill capable of engaging the full potential of the human brain at 100%, since humans only use 30%. But Eddie refuses, especially since he has nothing to pay for the drug, which costs $800. But his former brother-in-law simply gives him the pill, leaves a business card, and leaves. He looks at the pill and realizes he has nothing left to lose, and he decides to take the drug. The pill works instantly, and encountering the landlord's wife on the landing, demanding payment for rent, Eddie, in a matter of seconds, reads her condition and understands she has a problem at college. He sees uncertainty and confusion in her eyes. While she yells at him, he notices a book in her bag and realizes the girl is studying law. "That's none of your business. Something wrong at law school? How do you know I'm in law school?" The stream of knowledge that had been stored in his subconscious for years begins to form into clear thoughts. And having calmed her down, he even helps compile the necessary notes. In 45 minutes, it was a polished gem. She was pleased. Returning to his apartment, Eddie realizes he's living in a real pigsty, and if he wants to bring order to his mind, he'll have to start with the surrounding chaos. Energy literally overwhelms him, and having finished cleaning, he decides not to stop and immediately sits down to write his book. Words themselves line up into coherent, precise sentences, and having worked until late at night, Eddie falls asleep. But in the morning, he realizes the abilities have disappeared, and everything that yesterday seemed limitless has been reset. However, something remained. He shows the written text to his editor, and by the time he gets home, she's left several messages on the answering machine. She's amazed by his work. Eddie wants to call back, but realizes the text wasn't written by him, but by a different Eddie. "Eddie, give me a call when you get in. It's a little grandiose, but I'm still reading." Realizing he needs the pill again, he heads to Vernon, who greets him with a beaten face. His brother-in-law doesn't say who did it, but admits that NZT hasn't been approved by the ministry yet, and its production is completely illegal. When Eddie confesses he needs another pill, Vernon agrees to discuss it, but asks him to pick up his suit from the dry cleaners and grab something for breakfast. But when he returns, Eddie discovers Vernon is dead and immediately calls the police. Almost instantly, he guesses the killer was looking for the pills and possibly didn't find them. Realizing the apartment is already turned upside down, Eddie doesn't stand on ceremony, and in search of the coveted package adds even more chaos, not thinking about the consequences. Finally, in the oven, he finds what he was looking for, as well as a stack of money. Having hidden the package, he opens the door to the arriving police. At the station, he claims he didn't know what Vernon was involved in and met him completely by chance. The police release him, asking him to leave a phone number, and returning home, he immediately takes a pill. His consciousness clears again. The world becomes sharp and orderly, and Vernon's money, multiplied by a powerful surge of motivation, allows Eddie to finish the book in just 4 days. One pill a day, and his possibilities seem limitless. He rapidly changes, turning into a confident person who navigates absolutely everything: poker, piano, medicine, the stock market. There are no longer any closed topics for him, and in any company, he finds himself at the center of attention. Fear and shyness disappear, and he can no longer stop because the feeling of omnipotence literally overwhelms him. And soon an idea begins to form in his head that should take him to a completely new level. He starts studying the stock market, and with the help of Vernon's last $800, in just a couple of days, he earns $7,000. However, such growth seems too slow to Eddie, and banks refuse to give loans to a person without a stable past. So he turns to a Russian criminal authority named Genid, who agrees to give him $100,000 at high interest. With the support of Kevin, his new acquaintance, he gets a job from where he begins seriously trading on the stock exchange. Under the influence of the pill, Eddie turns into a flawless machine for analyzing markets. And by the end of the week, there's more more than $2 million in his brokerage account. Rumors about the successful trader spread quickly, and soon Kevin reports that a very serious financier named Carl Vanlin has scheduled a meeting with Eddie. Such a change can't help but affect his personal life as well. Lindy agrees to have dinner with him, and the new Eddie impresses her with his impeccable Italian and amazing ability to guess her emotions. Very soon they're together again. However, against the backdrop of this success, two things begin to trouble Eddie. He increasingly notices that an unknown man is following him, and he himself encounters bouts of disorientation, as if the reality around him is beginning to lose stability. Finally, the day of the meeting with Carl Vanlon arrives. He says little and prefers to listen to the story of how in just 10 days Eddie managed to multiply his fortune many times over. The simplicity and simultaneous brilliance of his approach attract the attention of Vanlon's assistant, although he senses in the young broker a dangerous self-confidence bordering on megalomania. Already in the car, Vanlon offers Eddie to look at a list of companies, and in just a few minutes, he understands that the magnate is preparing a major merger deal with Hank Atwood's business. Carl barely hides his surprise at how quickly the newcomer calculates the situation, and when Eddie points out the risk of the deal falling through, the magnate schedules another meeting with him. Inspired by Vanlon's interest in his abilities, Eddie decides to take a walk. He doesn't understand how he walks 20 blocks and suddenly finds himself at a subway station where he unexpectedly gets into a fight with 4 men and emerges victorious despite never having known how to fight before. The pill seemingly extracts from the depths of his memory martial arts techniques once seen in movies, and this proves sufficient to handle opponents without much effort. Another jump takes him to one of the suburban bars, and then he finds himself already at some party where he again notices that same man and goes off with an unfamiliar girl to a hotel. And when the pill's effect wore off, he couldn't remember the last 18 hours of his life. The night fight makes itself known, and with an injured leg, Eddie barely makes it home. Waking up the next day, he begins to understand that the drug is negatively affecting his condition, and having refused the pill, he decides to work on Vanloon's documents. However, for ordinary Eddie, these papers look like a set of hieroglyphics. Due to refusing the drug, he feels bad and asks Kevin to reschedule the meeting with Vanlon, but he insists, being confident that such a person won't give a second chance. At the appointed time, Eddie still comes to the meeting, but without the pill, he feels vulnerable and constrained. From Carl, he learns that 2 years ago, no one had heard of Hank Atwood, and now he heads one of the largest energy companies. However, Eddie's thoughts are occupied with something completely different. The news reports the body of Maria Winter has been found, and Eddie realizes with horror that this is the very girl with whom he secluded himself in a hotel room the day before. Witnesses saw an unknown man near her, and this information makes Eddie nauseous. And in panic, having fled from the meeting, he returns home. Melissa's call puts everything in its place. She warns him about the danger of the pills, and Eddie asks her for a meeting. Sitting in the park, Eddie decides to call Vernon's clients, but very quickly realizes that most of them have either died or ended up in the hospital. When he dials the next number, the call rings very close by, and he recognizes the man who's been following him all this time. Realizing who's calling him, the man rushes after Eddie, but he manages to escape. Having gotten rid of his pursuer, Eddie meets with Melissa and barely recognizes in her the woman who once attracted the envious glances of surrounding men. She immediately understands that Eddie has been taking the pills for a long time and confesses that she herself was once her brother's client. At first, the drug made her life perfect, giving a feeling of omnipotence, but learning that people die from it because no brain is capable of withstanding such a load for long, she decided to quit. Now she suffers from headaches and nausea that deprive her of the ability to concentrate. Melissa advises Eddie to gradually reduce the dose and then refuse the drug. Immersed in his own problems, he forgets about Goned's interest, and he decides to remind him about it. Seeing a pill in Eddie's hands, the authority figure without hesitation takes it and goes with him to the bank. Eddie can't remember if there are any pills left at his place, but knows he made a stash in Lindy's apartment. Going to her workplace, he confesses everything, and now she understands where this energy came from. And Eddie asks her to bring the pill that should get him back on his feet. He receives a call from Lindy, who in panic reports that an unknown man is following her. When he gets out of the car, she also leaves the vehicle and tries to hide. Lindy turns to passers-by for help, but this doesn't stop the pursuer, and without the slightest hesitation, he kills 2 men. But this is enough for Lindy to manage to hide. Finding herself in relative safety, she tells Eddie that the man is still looking for her. Realizing this is the only chance, Lindy decides to take the pill, and in the next moment, her consciousness clears. Her brain seemingly begins to read the surrounding space on its own, analyzing details and choosing the most optimal path. Almost without thinking, she rushes toward the ice rink, knowing in advance what her next action will be. She wounds the pursuer and escapes the chase. Finally, Lindy reaches Eddie and he receives the life-saving pill. They rent a hotel room, and in the morning, Lindy admits that only now does she truly understand how much the pill changes a person. And Eddie assures her that he'll stop taking the drug as soon as he can provide them with a carefree life. However, a new problem appears. The effect of the pills made a strong impression on Gennady, and Eddie gives him several pills, trying to buy time. Realizing the danger, he hires bodyguards and asks them to keep their distance, not attracting unnecessary attention. Don't wear the same color suit. This isn't the Matrix. Eddie finally meets with Von Lon, who admits that after studying the prepared report, he fired several employees who couldn't do what one person did. So 2 months after starting to take the pills, Eddie becomes a key intermediary in the largest corporate merger in history. Understanding that sooner or later the pills will run out, Eddie offers a chemist $2 million to create a new batch of the drug, and he agrees to always have pills at hand. He asks his tour make hidden pockets in all his suits. However, the situation soon becomes complicated when Eddie learns that a witness in the Maria Winter case has identified him as the man seen near her on the evening of the murder. He hires the best lawyer in New York and finds out that all traces at the crime scene were carefully destroyed. Despite the looming threat of arrest, Eddie continues to participate in negotiations with Hank Atwood, and after their completion, demands payment for his contribution. For Vanlin, Eddie has long ceased to be just a valuable employee. He has become a strategic advantage that cannot be released since he's capable of seeing the market years ahead, finding vulnerabilities in the largest corporations, and if desired, easily moving to competitors. That's why the request for $40 million in freedom sounds to Vanlin not like a business proposal, but like a loss of control over an overly dangerous asset. You don't know how to assess your competition because you haven't competed. Don't make me your competition. And to keep Eddie close, Carl opens unlimited credit for him, ready to cover any expenses. Realizing that he's getting deeper into a dangerous game, Eddie decides to buy an apartment in one of the city's elite buildings, calculating that a dwelling with a multi-level security system will become a real bunker for him. Meanwhile, Gennady reappears on the horizon, demanding new pills and blackmailing Eddie with threats to tell the press about the Maria Winter case. On the appointed day, instead of Hank Atwood, his wife comes to the meeting and reports that he suddenly became ill and ended up in the hospital. Escorting her to the car, Eddie recognizes in the driver the very man who had previously pursued him, and at this moment, it dawns on him that Atwood was also taking the pills. During the identification procedure, Morris Brandt selects people who look as similar to Eddie as possible, and the witness behind the glass gets confused in his testimony, never managing to point to the person he saw on the evening of the murder. For Eddie, everything ends well, and having taken his jacket from Morris, he goes to Carl, from whom he learns that Atwood has fallen into a coma. This news makes Eddie remember that he himself missed taking a pill, and secluding himself in the restroom, he discovers that his stash is empty. Returning to Van Loan's office, Eddie receives a package from the secretary addressed personally to him, and inside finds a message from Gennady, the severed hands of his bodyguards. Ignoring Vanlin, he leaves him, and already in his apartment, seeing Morris Brandt in the news next to Atwood's wife, he understands who exactly robbed him. A knock on the door pulls him from his thoughts, and he hears Gennady's voice demanding he open immediately. Realizing that he has no pills and won't be able to buy off the authority figure, Eddie decides to settle accounts with life. But standing on the edge and preparing to take the fatal step, he suddenly remembers the last pill that should be hidden in one of the boxes. Eddie frantically starts searching while the bandits are breaking down the door. But having found the coveted pill, he stumbles and doesn't have time to take it. Finding himself in Gennady's hands, Eddie sees that he has changed the method of taking the drug, explaining that this way the drug enters the bloodstream faster and acts longer. Learning that Eddie has nothing more, Jan orders the apartment searched and doesn't notice how he hides a knife behind his back. While his men break open the safe, the authority figure declares that he'll find out the truth anyway, even if he has to torture Eddie to death. But Janadai's overconfidence fails him, and when he comes too close, Eddie strikes, mortally wounding the authority figure. This last push takes too much strength from him, but suddenly he realizes that the drug is in Janad's blood, and pressing to the floor, he begins greedily drinking it. The drug immediately begins to work, producing the already familiar effect. Consciousness clears. Thoughts again line up in perfect sequence, and a clear plan forms in Eddie's head. Calculating his opponent's actions several steps ahead, he deals with them, and once again avoids imminent death. That same evening, Hank Atwood dies, and Eddie informs his guard that the medicine that could have saved his boss was with Morris Brandt, but he preferred to keep it for himself. The killer doesn't like this, and he decides to punish the lawyer while Eddie finally gets to the drug. A year passes, Edward Moore is running for senator, and he's informed that one of the largest sponsors wants to meet with him. Vanlin quickly understands how high Eddie is aiming, and makes it clear that he knows about the drug. He found out which lab was producing the drug for Eddie, bought the company, and closed it, thereby becoming the only person capable of resuming production. In return, Vanlin wants only one thing, that when Eddie reaches the presidency, he'll promote the interests of a certain circle of people. However, the future senator is not satisfied with such an arrangement. Eddie calmly explains that he foresaw this scenario and long ago set up several labs working simultaneously. Moreover, throughout the entire year, he collected information about Vanlin himself and prepared countermeasures in case he decided to attack. No matter how hard Carl tries to outsmart him, Eddie still sees the situation several steps ahead. And to prove this, in a matter of seconds making a calculation, he predicts an accident. By Van Loon's changed heartbeat, he understands that the magnet's heart is working at only half capacity and he'll soon need surgery. Carl fails to persuade him to cooperate, and having gotten rid of Vanlin, Eddie goes to lunch where, having placed an order in Chinese, he no longer surprises Lindy.